Welcome to Post-Traumatic Thriving, where we explore life's toughest issues, along with the art, science, and stories of resilience. Please be advised that our guests share their raw stories of addiction, abuse, crime, and tragedy, along with tips to survive and thrive. And now, here are our hosts, Dr. RandallBell and Tanya Brown.
Welcome back to Post-Traumatic Thriving. I am Dr. RandallBell, joined by Tanya Brown.
Hey, Randy. Hi, everyone.
And our wonderful guest, Leigh Steinberg, who needs very little introduction. Jerry Maguire is obviously a huge movie played by, what's his name again?
Tom Cruise.
Oh, yeah, Tom Cruise.
What's his name?
Which I noticed right away, Leigh, you're far better looking than Tom Cruise. That's the best they could come up with, I guess. But to recap where we went in the last episode, you grew up in West LA. Sounds like a wonderful family, wonderful dad in particular that you were very close with, wonderful value system of cherishing relationships and having a purposeful, meaningful life where there's a real focus on empathy and looking for situations where we could improve people's lives.
Giving back.
Yeah. And in contrast to a lot of our guests who, I mean, I was born with a congenital heart defect. So some of us are born into a trauma. But your story is happily the opposite. You were born into a, kind of a
privilege,
charmed, was the word, charmed lifestyle.
Cush.
Yeah. And then you go to UCLA and then up to Berkeley, student body president, law school. You get into this wonderful world of being a sports agent, which is very dynamic.
And kind of random.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just kind of random. Somebody had said, "Hey, I want you to represent me."
Yeah.
Right?
And then you're on the private jets and the mansions and the limousines, hobnobbing with the big names we read about in the newspaper. And along comes the movie. I'd probably like to talk about that a little bit more. But then, going from drinking one beer at a party to drinking, in excess.
In college.
Yeah. And alcoholism is, I think it touches every family. One of my aunts passed away from alcoholism. Another aunt, as kids, we were pretty immature, but we thought it was, she had a glass of water, but it was really vodka. And she lived to 94 in this constant, and her choice was vodka as well. And so it affects families, and it doesn't affect me, but it affects others. So it
affects everyone.
Yeah, it affects every family somewhere around the world, around.
Yeah.
But anyway, Leigh, I want to just kind of, introduce the recovery process, because your recovery didn't come quickly for you. It seemed like it was a process of experimenting, finding what would work. You went from Harvard to Hoag to here and there. Can you kind of tell us more about what recovery looked like? Well, and let's start with, what was the moment where you said, you know what, something's got to change?
It wasn't until I really went to live at my parents' house when I didn't have my practice anymore because I had turned it over to the younger agents. And I was having problems in my relationship with one of my sons who didn't talk to me the whole time he was at SC at film school. And financially, I was in debt, and I was not living with my family. I was divorced. It was then. I knew I had a problem enough to try to go to rehabs, and they were really well-designed programs. The one I went to at Belmont Hospital back in Harvard, they approached it from a standpoint of guided imagery, hormonal tests, sleep studies. I mean, it was brilliant psychiatrists and everything. I just couldn't stop drinking. And I excelled in they would hand you a piece of work to do, and I go back to my room and do it, and you bring it to the people, and they said, "What's this?" I said, "You just gave me an assignment." So I threw myself into all that, and but none of it worked. the only thing that worked was this 12-step program with a unique fellowship. And so and living in sober living to give me long enough so that the cravings that are irresistible for most of the period finally abate and go away.
Mm-hmm.
And that first day that you realize you haven't thought about alcohol all day, you know, is a revelation. And so I tried to develop habits that made sense. I went in my first year, I went to meetings every day. I went to the Southern California Convention, the Desert Powwow, every event that they had, any book that they had. So basically, my whole life, I'd been the expert. I'd been the person that was quoted in television, radio, and newspapers, and I gave advice, good life advice to hundreds and hundreds of people. And it wasn't just my clients. It could be an NFL owner. It could be a political figure. It could be the president of the United States. I'd always been able to put myself in another person's heart and mind, see the world the way they see it, and help counsel them to fulfill their own goals.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was in an area where I was completely ignorant and didn't understand anything. So I looked at it just like college, that I needed to be learning from people that I heard sharing at meetings and sharing in other situations, reading everything I could, going to every meeting I could, trying everything. And so when I moved out of sober living, I moved out with one of the fellows that was there with me, and he stayed my roommate for the last 12 and a half years. So I haven't changed that. I have the same home group that I had before. I have the same sponsor. I don't necessarily know every facet of what might be working, and I consider myself a bun still in the oven cooking, and I'll be cooking for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So I never consider that I'm a finished product. I'm just, you know, progressing through recovery, even though it's been a number of years now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously you found something very successful, and I remember reading in your book that you said that you found your higher power. Is there anything you didn't say a lot, that at least that I read? Is there any more that you'd want to share about how that aspect of the 12-step program worked in your life?
So I had a hard time, like a lot of people do, getting to the concept of a bearded God. I grew up Jewish, and any study of Jewish history, which is, you know, the Holocaust and these horrors that for 2,000 years have been visited upon Jews, it's like, what kind of God would create a people and then torture them for 2,000 years? You know, it's with pogroms and with inquisitions and with everything. So I just used the group. I used the group and could sense a spirit that was present. And my higher power initially was the spirit that lives in a young mother working 3 jobs to support her kids, or the fella getting up in Tiananmen Square against tanks. And it's the uplifting power of goodness and love. And the group became my higher power at the start. And so everyone finds what they need. And to this day, I'd be mortified to disappoint my my sponsor or my home group. I mean, I never want to walk in there as a newcomer.
Yeah.
Again, I went back to Canton, Ohio twice and went to where Dr. Bob and Bill and they originally created a program.
Mhm.
And so I even did that.
Mhm.
And I wasn't necessarily sure what would work, but basically I followed this. I surrendered. I accepted that I couldn't do it alone and I needed a higher power. I found a sponsor who had a sponsor. I worked at 12 steps in order, read the book, the big book, and then tried to be of service to other people.
Mhm.
And how I did that was less a matter of individually sponsoring a whole bunch of people, because at the meetings I'm at, I'm sort of like the oldest or close to the oldest. So, but by being public and open.
Yeah.
And talking about it. And pretty soon there were hundreds and hundreds of people across the country who were, I don't mean this egotistically, but they were following my journey and telling me that it was giving them hope.
Nice.
So I thought, well, what lifetime would I be waiting for to share what happened and what it was like and how it changed?
Mhm.
Why would I hide that?
Yeah.
Why would I not be open and tell other people this happened to me? But you can make it. And if you're out there and you're struggling and despondent and depressed because of problems with addictive substances, and you've lost hope, you know, I'm sitting on my dad's bed, and all I can think of is more vodka, you know, and lost pretty much everything. And you can make it. You
Yeah.
can come back.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that arrogantly, but I mean it humbly
Yeah.
that it's possible. If you ever lose faith, proportionality will help save you. Involvement will help save you. And I want other people to know that if I can be helpful in their fight, if, you couldn't have been more hopeless than I was 13 years ago.
Yeah.
That is just so
Yeah.
powerful and so beautiful. I
And
think-
yeah. Thank you for
Y-
sharing that.
Yeah,
with
I mean, you
people.
just exemplified the courage
Mhm.
to say, you know what, I'm gonna face this problem, and not only that, I'm gonna talk
Yeah.
about it. You know, I made the classic mistake of never wanted to talk about my heart surgery when I was 11. I hated the topic. I wanted to change the subject as fast as I could. And what you just showed folks is the complete opposite,
Mhm.
to open it up, because it's very helpful and therapeutic to ourselves. And also it helps. I mean, we've got millions of views on social media.
Yeah.
This helps a lot of people to press forward, because they say, hey, if Leigh Steinberg
Mhm.
can fall off the wagon and have this triumphant empire that he builds and then fall off, then and then get back on the horse and ride it successfully for years and years, maybe I can do the same thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was approached by William Croyle, who was my co-writer on Finding Peace Amid the Chaos, he goes, Tanya, you have a story. And I'm like, I don't have a story. I go, everybody has a story, you know, but sometimes it takes people like you. Sometimes it takes people like me and like you're, you know, for whoever else is listening to this, to help you bring, you know, that story out. Because I didn't think I had a story. Next thing you know, I wrote a book, and it's a crazy story, but I had no idea I had that in me. But I sat on that it was published in 2012, but my attempt was in 2004. And I held on to that story, my personal experience. I mean, I was like, I don't want to go around telling people that I attempted to take my life with Klonopin and red wine and lashed out at everybody in my family. I mean, it was a total like debacle. But in 2012, when William reached out to me and he said, you do have a story, and I'm so grateful that I had somebody to say, you have a story. And now that book is helping so many people. And like your story, how you just, and I'm looking at you, but when you were just sharing that, you were like speaking intently into the camera, because you were speaking to that person who needs help, and you don't know who that person is. They may never reach out to you,
Well, they're
but you
there.
will reach. Yeah.
We hear plenty of feedback.
Yeah.
Um,
So thank you for that.
so what words of advice do you have for somebody who's trying to recover from these things, and they're taking the cues, they're going to the rehab center down the street, and it hasn't worked out and they fall off the wagon? What advice do you have for them to say, hey, don't give up? What different, both pragmatic and philosophical pieces of advice you might have, Leigh?
Well, let's start with the concept that you have this one life, and it's short in some ways and it's long in other ways. And so the concept of giving up, I never give up. I never give up. At the worst, you have to be able to conceptualize and visualize a better life.
Mm-hmm.
And that, no, you haven't thrown it all away. No, there's resurrection. I mean, in America, we love the fall of the high and mighty, but we also love the comeback story.
Yeah.
And it's resilience. Life will knock all of us back. We'll all have reverses. You'll get knocked back. You'll get knocked down. You'll be frustrated and depressed and by events. Can you be resilient? Can you come back from that? Can you summon up internally a feeling about your best self?
Mm-hmm.
And can you look around you and see the people that are dependent on you, the people that are impacted by you, and do it for yourself, but do it for them too.
Yeah.
Because we're under the illusion as alcoholics or addicts that well, I'm just being self-destructive. There are no victims here. And in reality, there are many, many, many people. So it's having that. And then it's following a program with structure and discipline, so that and when you go to that unique fellowship, you'll be surrounded by people that want to help you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So instead of being isolated the way I was late at night drinking, or the way I was sitting in my apartment drinking, you're surrounded by people and you have the examples of people. And when you hear their stories, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
some of them will be much worse than anything that
Mhm.
you have. People talk about 12 drunk driving, about how they had a collision with a police car,
Mhm.
how some of the,
No, honestly, when you think that you've heard the worst, it's like, whoa.
right.
But that
So-
can also work against somebody too, where it's like, oh, my story's not that bad.
But then look at the people today, and that sharp, bright, together person was just where you were, right?
Yeah.
And just look at the examples around you of people who were able to come back. I mean, I go from sitting at on my father's bed to negotiating the biggest contract in the history of sports, and still hopefully making a difference in the world.
Mhm.
That part was the easy part. The hard part was maintaining sobriety.
Mhm.
That was the challenge. I mean, I knew that I could be conventionally successful, but oh my God, what was this that I did to myself?
Mhm.
And how can you come back? So you have some great role models around you. And like I said, I looked at it like I was just going back to college, and there were some very wise people in those meetings
Mhm.
that had first offered you hope.
Mhm.
And we're offering other people hope. I'm telling you, you can do this if you're out there struggling. You can do it. It takes time and some patience. And patience is a hard thing. I
Mhm.
mean, people with our personalities want a quick fix.
Right now.
We, we want to feel better immediately.
Mhm.
And if one drink's good, well,
Bring it.
be better?
Bring
You
it.
know, so the same compulsivity that helped in other enterprises, in other words, compulsivity and wanting achievement meant that I did more first round draft picks than anybody. We raised more money for charity. We did all that. But when you turn it to an addictive substance, it works against you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. In society, we just are acclimated to the idea of great solutions in a half-hour episode of
Like that.
on TV. And I think what I hear you say, well, how long, Lee, did it take from the realization that I got a serious problem to actually getting sober? How long did that take?
Um, the only time that worked once I had this self-induced affliction
Mhm.
was when I lived in sober living. And because that gave me a structure. So they had you go to a lot of meetings. So you're going to meetings every day. The social part of that was really healing for me because
Mhm.
I'm a social person. I love people.
Mhm.
And being surrounded by that, I just went out and made a bunch of friends and
Yeah.
got to know people. And I didn't have time to do that since, I was back in high school.
Yeah.
And so there were parts of it, I mean, hesitate to say this, but they were enjoyable because you got group bonding and I got
Mhm.
to meet a whole bunch of different people. Now, the home group I go to, if you walked in, you would think it was a cross between a tattoo parlor, Pirates of the Caribbean, and a Hell's Angels meeting. So,
And Lee Steinberg.
Every time I go to these sober events, I'm like, I think I'm the only one who doesn't smoke or have a tattoo.
so it,
That's funny.
but it was fundamental recovery, and they had a formula, and they told you what you needed to do, and that worked for me because I'm achievement oriented. I want, I'm not the person that procrastinates. I want to get out there and do it right now. So if you take those same concepts and remember how this screws people up, because we alcoholics are clever. So there came times towards the end of my run where I had people helping me. They took my car keys from my apartment. They took my wallet. So if there was a day I was drinking, there was no way I was going to get in trouble, except I would go down below my condo complex to the pavilions there, and I would tell them, you know me, I'm in here pretty much every day. Doggone it, I left my wallet in my house. Do you think you could? And I'd walk out with a bottle of vodka.
Mm.
They would
Wow.
take everything from me. And so your creativity and cleverness works against you because you end up. The other thing I would say is there's so many great people and mentors who will help you. I didn't make this back by myself. I mean, I had financial problems. People stepped in for me. I never am going to think that I did whatever I'm doing alone. I did it with the help of some amazing people, and you'll find them out there.
Yeah.
We're willing to help.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because I've got my things, but one of them is not alcoholism, but I do have a close relative that does. And so I've been to his 12-step meetings to just show support. But I was very impressed with the level of wisdom. The level of wisdom coming from these pirates and
Tattoos.
and everybody was astounding. And also you're right, the willingness to help. And the giving service was profound.
Yeah.
And
That's the
so
12
it's
step.
there if we will reach out, I guess, accept it.
Absolutely.
Right.
I remember after my mom died, I went into like drinking mode. My mom was like my life. She was like my world. And there were like probably about 2 or 3 months there where I was hitting the wine bottle quite a bit. And I remember, I remember going to CVS and they were out of my cupcake. That was always my favorite, right? They were out of my cupcake Chardonnay.
Oh,
The clerk said, "Oh, we must be out. This isn't your normal wine. This isn't your regular wine." And I'm like, "Oh my God."
the clerk recognized
I am busted right now
at CVS.
at CVS.
Yeah. Well, Leigh, you're really fortunate. I mean, I read about the accidents you had down on PCH in your Mercedes. I mean, you took out
That's where I
some
hit the
trees and
fire
yeah,
hydrant.
yeah.
It was there was no drought that night in Newport Beach. The water came out of the hydrant.
Oh, wow.
When you
When you-
crash, you
Yeah, you
crash
go big.
spectacular. Yeah.
Okay, so when I was in my practicum, I would tell people, go to Al-Anon, go to AA, read the book, regardless if you're an alcoholic or an addict. There's so much great wisdom and information and spiritual, elements to that book. And, like you said, you get
and-
that at meetings too.
And it quickly became apparent to me that the people in these meetings were brighter than average and they had higher IQs. And it made sense to me because people who are more aware are more sensitive and get bothered by things that someone with narrow focus wouldn't. And if you can get past the slang and man and dude and all that, they're actually much brighter than average. And you hear some real wisdom. And the thing is, we all have the commonality, notwithstanding our background, or we all relate on one level that our brains got rewired and we can never safely use that addictive substance again. It's just gone. I heard something really early. Someone said, if you spent an hour a day on a recovery oriented activity, and if that bought you 23 hours of freedom, isn't that a good trade? If you just spent an hour a day and the rest of the time you're free, you have to yourself, whether it's an hour going to a meeting, whether it's an hour reading the book, whether it's an hour meditating or praying, whatever, or an hour now. But point is, I was enslaved to a substance. And now, based on my spiritual condition and doing some basic things, I'm free.
Yeah.
But I can never safely imbibe alcohol. My brain's been. What happens is you become ahedonic, which means you don't have enough dopamine. And there are all sorts of autonomic functions that the brain does without us thinking. You don't have to think about the fact you have to go to the bathroom. It's pretty abundantly clear. You don't have to think about the fact that something is painful. You ought to avoid doing it. You don't have to think about the fact that you have to eat, the motivation, or that you want to make love or whatever. And you don't have to think about the fact that you breathe. But the brain gets tricked, and it starts to conflate the need for the substance with something as important to the body as breathing itself. Like that you'll die if you don't have this, that you have to have. And it sends out craving. And the cravings overwhelm every rational thought that you have. So I would pull up to my condo and I'd say, you know what, this night I'm not going to drink. This could be the first night of something really great. And somehow, autonomically, half hour later, the car had driven itself to the liquor store, driven back, and I had a big bottle of vodka in my thing. Now, how did that happen? I was sitting and I was determined not to drink. Now, when people think that alcoholics don't have willpower or addicts don't have willpower, well, I think I've had a little willpower in the world. I created a profession built. I think a little bit of willpower doesn't matter. Once you have altered your brain, it's altered. That pickle's not going to become a cucumber.
Right.
Again, it's pickled.
It's pickled.
Yeah. So, okay. So Leigh, you really went through the hard knocks. I guess I got a couple questions on my mind. What was the reaction to you walking into the room from the pirates and the tattoo artists and everybody in the room?
On purpose, I went to a meeting where they would have as little knowledge or care about what I did outside. Because early meetings were hard for me. I mean, people would bring a tape of Jerry Maguire and ask me to autograph it. People would ask me innumerable amounts of sports questions. That didn't help me. I mean, I could be back in my office answering doing interviews. That didn't help me. I needed to find a meeting where I'd be anonymous, a humble, searching person searching for truth and recovery. And I needed not to be that public person. Now, it's not that people at that meeting are completely unaware of what I do. I mean, they read newspapers and they do all the rest of it. But it's not the reason I go. And it was difficult early on to find, a group, because men love sports, and it's the ability to talk about it with somebody, or they're intrigued with Jerry Maguire or any given Sunday or the movies that I did, but that wasn't going to help me. I didn't want to be that public person. I wanted to be
You.
searching, humble, trying to solve this problem.
So what I kind of hear out of that is that you experimented, for lack of a better word, you tried out different groups until you found one that worked for you, that where people respected the process rather than,
or they were just oblivious.
Yeah.
Because, they
Okay.
were
Pirates of the Caribbean.
their world was, riding dirt bikes and hike camping and hiking and riding, motorcycles, and the different set of interests. So, if they'd been typical hardcore male team sport fans, I mean, part of the problem is that pro football completely dominates the entertainment patterns of this country now. 71 of the top 100 shows last year on Nielsen were NFL games.
Hmm.
So it's not only the most popular sport, it's the most popular television show.
Mhm.
And so given that that was the sport I sort of dominated, it's hard to um, I have a profession that is of special interest to growing number of women and all men.
Yeah.
I didn't even consider that. I mean, to me, you're just Leigh, you know, but I didn't even take that into consideration, that it would have been that hard for you. Understandable.
Well,
Kind of, it sucks being in the public eye sometimes.
well, you went through the thing with your
Yeah.
whole O.J. Simpson thing.
Yeah.
Was the media was camped outside your room
Exactly.
or outside your house in Monarch Beach.
Literally outside my
You
room.
went through that with just your reputation,
Uh-huh.
the bigness of
You can't
your
hide.
career.
Yeah, you can't hide.
And that's got to kind of get in the way when you're trying to get down to business and take care of, your grieving family
Mhm.
or your situation, trying to get healthy again.
Yeah.
It's kind of a
A
curse,
challenge.
at least in that context.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm guessing that a lot of people that are also in the public eye, and we're of course not here to tell their stories, but have reached out to you too, because they can relate to you in the fact that you've been public as well.
Oh, I mean, I was fortunate in early recovery. I got calls from Charles Barkley, or the owner of the San Antonio Spurs, or all sorts of people did reach out, and it wasn't like I was abandoned by my clients, some of whom I'd had for a long period of time. And again, other than getting like a DUI, a lot of them were oblivious to it,
Mhm.
because most of my drinking was done by myself,
Mm-hmm.
in my apartment or
Mhm.
condo.
Yeah.
And I wasn't perfect. I mean, there were times in public that probably wish I'd been more sober, but by and large, the bulk of my drinking was by myself,
Mhm.
isolated.
Yeah. This is my observation. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it seems to me, and I've heard from people that are really highly educated in this field of recovery, that the typical recovery home has a pretty a dismal success rate, in terms of, non-recurring issues, but the 12-step program brings an element of soul
Mhm.
and a higher power, however that's described. I think my observation is very respectful of how that's defined, but it brings that soul, for lack of a better word, to the table rather than just the science, the
Yeah.
secular checklists and the brilliant psychologists that know the neurological pathways of dopamine. But bringing soul into the
Mhm.
conversation,
Spirit.
bringing service to the conversation, has a much better success rate. Is that a fair observation or not?
See, I think that that the recovery homes that work have a strong social camaraderie, male bonding or female bonding component to them. The people go through this experience together. So in the same way that I'm still rooming with the same person I was in sober living with 13 years ago, you'll see of long-term people that they went through it with a group. They were like a pledge class or
Mhm.
like an affinity group. And there might have been 5 or 6 of them that went to all the same meetings, did all the same stuff, and ended up socializing.
Mhm.
So I think that social component, because look, we come out of the cave in 20 to 30 unit groups, right? We're used to that. And we wither as human beings without social interaction.
Mhm.
And so you go from isolation to being surrounded by people who are doing the same thing you're doing. And when you come out of that, you know, they've seen you at your worst, and, but you go through this progression together. So I think the social component of it's really, important. And, like I said, you know, I would get a big pack of birthday cards and give them to the people celebrating birthdays. And I tried to meet all the people I could, and there's that component that you're not doing it alone. You're in this with other guys, and that's strong, whether it's a football team or army or any that. I can't speak for women, but for male bonding is really important.
It's a
If you
family.
got guys that you can and laugh about the whole thing, because we're so absurd. At the end of the
Well, the opposite of addiction is connection, right? Yeah, nothing good comes out of isolation. That's when my head starts going there. Yeah. The opposite of addiction is connection. And I love meetings, because, you know, the alumni, you know, a lot of these rehabs, they have alumni programs. So meaning like people who graduate from alumni.
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 Oh,
What did I
okay.
say? Alumni?
I
Alumni.
thought I heard a variation of alumni. Anyway,
Alumni.
wanna scare that away.
when you come into the process and you hear someone say, I've had 20 years of sobriety, and you're a newcomer, it seems impossible. I mean, when you're a newcomer, the thought of not drinking for one day,
Mhm.
much less whatever, and that's why they do a day at a time.
Yeah.
Because if you tell someone who's newly recovering they can never ever use the substance again,
Yeah, it's
they would look at you in abject horror and run for the hills.
I remember I went to an AA meeting. I had to go for a class. This was years ago for my bachelor's program. And I remember sitting next to a guy tatted up. Here I am, little white girl from Monarch Bay in this little bubble. I'm sitting next to this kid tatted up, and he's like sitting there and he's just jittering and he's shaking his legs and his hands. I mean, his whole body was shaking, and everybody was talking about one day at a time. And he abruptly stood up, and I'm like, oh my God, like, is he going to hit me? Like, what's happening here? And he says, you know what? It's not one day at a time. It's second by second. So he must have just like was, you know, in the depth of his addiction, probably.
Yeah. But, you know, one thing I've heard is that the turnaround really happens when you have your back against the wall. You're just out
It's
of
the
options.
bottom.
Yeah.
So the point is, you have to hit whatever for each person is so completely unacceptable. Because what happens is every time you hit a bottom, you think it's the worst. Oh, I just had a DUI. I can't get worse than that. Well, oh, I just missed a day of work. I can't get worse than that. But the point is, whatever it is that's totally unacceptable, you can't live that way. Is what motivates you to do the work of a program, because it's work, and it's and parts of it are painful. You're going back through your entire life and figuring out who you need to make amends to, and who you've damaged, and looking at your character defects and all the rest of it. So that takes a little bit of courage for most people. It's and so you have to have hit that bottom. It's just no must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No more.
Can't
And you
be.
meant, oh, go ahead. Well, you mentioned amends, and my friend, I think it's like step 9, step 8, or step 9, can't remember. But anyway, she was making amends. I accepted the apology. However, her sister didn't. And she was devastated over that. And I always said, she came back to me and said, you know, her disappointment, she shared it with me. And I said, you know, we apologize for ourselves. We don't apologize for them. We apologize. So we, you know, it's cutting that cord, that ball and chain. So we don't, whether they accept it or not, that's up to them. That's their issue. But you do it for yourself, so then you can be free of that ball and chain.
I had
Yeah.
never thought of it that way.
Mhm.
That's a great point.
Yep.
So Leigh, how long has it been since you've had a drink? Well, do you know the day?
I happen to, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
My last drink was March 20th, 2010.
Beautiful.
Mm.
So that's been
Awesome.
well over a
Yeah,
decade.
12
I'm
years.
going through my 13th year.
Yeah.
I have later this month, it'll be 12 and a half years. So what I
Awesome.
do is I post each year on my birthday.
Mhm.
And all I say is 12 years on the sunny side of the street,
Yeah.
Mhm.
which is sort of code or people got the problem or whatever, understand that, but you're trying to not boast
Yeah.
about something that you wish you'd never had gotten about. Look at it this way. So let's say you're Monty Hall, and behind door 1 is bad health problems, financial problems, reputational problems, career problems, and all the rest. And behind door 2 is peace and well-being and good family life and everything. Who would willingly choose door 1?
Mhm.
So something's going on, because rationally, nobody would choose that life.
Yeah.
So by abusing the substance, you lost the main thrust for what brings fulfillment in life.
Mhm.
Mm. Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, is there anything else, Leigh, you want to share about kind of the recovery process before we take a break and get into the thrive of the last 12 years where you've been sober and thriving?
No, I think we've
We've covered it pretty
pretty-
well, haven't we?
Yeah, I kind of want to talk about the God thing really fast. There's something in the big book that says God as you know him, right?
God is
God as you know him, right? I don't know what page it's on, but I hear that quite a bit, where it's like, because people can get scared, even with like a higher power, people get scared of God, people get scared of, religion, right? So I think it says somewhere in the big book, God as you know him.
Well,
Yeah.
see, the whole point to that is that people with addictive problems feel like they're responsible for every single thing that happens in life, everything, and that they can control everything in life. And that control led us to addiction or that feeling. So that if you can just get the higher power as some larger spirit than yourself,
Mhm.
can help you through this process.
Yeah. I heard something this week about God, and it was that people ask why all the calamities, why the atrocities, and I'm still kind of processing it, but the thought was the teacher is always quietest during the test.
Mhm.
And, what we're going through here with addiction is a test, and connecting to that higher power, whatever that looks like. I think what I admire about the 12-step program is that it allows people to define that in whatever way.
Mhm.
It's very respectful. There's no agenda. There's
Right.
no theology discussion.
Everyone is welcome.
And whatever works, but realizing there's something bigger than ourselves, whether that's humanity or whatever it is,
Yeah.
is a very helpful concept. And I loved your comments, Leigh, about the social aspect, the need to connect with people, because this is not a solo exercise.
No.
That's why Tanya and I do this podcast, is because we got to get this conversation going out there. I mean, your family literally changed the world in terms of the discussion around domestic violence.
Mhm.
That's as been rippled around literally the world.
Yeah.
I've been to Asia and talked to people that know about your family and the discussion of domestic violence. Leigh, you're coming here and being vocal about some things that frankly are kind of embarrassing, crashing your Mercedes into a fire hydrant. There's some funny aspects to that, and there's some not so funny aspects. But by talking about it, hopefully there are people that are getting the message and deciding to keep going, keep fighting, don't give up, and getting the tools to say, hey, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try this.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's why we do this.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a saying in this field that alcoholics are not a glum lot. So I totally understand the nature of this disease I have and where it took me and the tragedy of that. But at the same time, meetings are filled with a lot of laughter because people have traditionally made it in the world when tragic things happen, is to be able to laugh at the absurdity of it.
Yeah.
And if it was just grind with no end in sight, and there wasn't a perspective of some humor there, I don't think people would necessarily stick around.
Yeah. And I've said that a lot when I facilitate groups in treatment centers. I always say it can't be only AA and only recovery 24/7. Like, you need to go surf, you need to go laugh, you need to go to a comedy club, right? Like, I totally believe in the humor and the laughter element of it. Working in when I did admissions at a local treatment hospital, these kids would come in, I was there the very second that they'd come in, the noodle groovers, you're right. And people living in dumpsters and, under bridges, and they came in so hopeless and helpless. And within like 3 days, because of the connection that they have with so many other people who are just like them, they look different, they behave different, they come and talk to you. And anytime I ever heard somebody say, this program isn't working, this isn't working. And I'm like, come here, let me show you your admissions picture. And they're like, oh my God, that's what I look like when I came in. Yeah, that's how you came in. So the whole connection, and, like I said earlier, the opposite of addiction is connection.
Leigh, I loved your point about the meetings, because I'm not an alcoholic, but I have family members that are, and I want to support them, and friends as well. And so I've been to a number of the meetings, and you're absolutely right. They're fascinating and they're funny.
Fun.
Some of the guys are hilarious. I mean, it's really a dynamic that it's like, hey, I want to come back. Can I come back? And they're like, I don't know.
Well, it's kind of like the Magic House. We had, Dr. Phil, not the Dr. Phil, but Dr. Phil.
Pastor Phil.
Pastor Phil. Yeah, you called him Dr. Phil. The Magic House in Anaheim. Have you ever heard of it? Yeah, it is so great. It is so much fun. I walked in. Why was I there? Oh, I wanted to meet Anthony Brown, who was going to be one of our guests, and he was speaking there that night. And I walked in again, I'm going, oh my gosh, I don't belong here, right? People tatted head to toe, piercings everywhere. I'm telling you, I never had more fun in my life at that than in that place.
I'm going back.
It is so much fun.
I'm going back. There was a guy he introduced me to that literally was a Hell's Angel, and he had the neck tattoos. I mean, the whole thing. He looked so frightening, and he's a doctor. He's a PhD.
Oh my God.
And he was fascinating. And you can't judge people by their appearance. It's just throw that out the window.
You
Let
never
people
know.
do their thing. So, okay. So we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the last 12 years. And I think what we've accomplished here, Leigh, is you've given really a beautiful kind of mosaic of what this recovery process looks like, where you're kind of, this mega star in the world, it crashes, and then the recovery process. We're going to come back and talk about thriving here on Post-Traumatic Thriving, where you die, survive, or thrive.
The choice is yours.
Thanks for supporting our podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and follow us on your favorite social media. For books, merchandise, or to donate, visit coreiq.com. Post-Traumatic Thriving is produced by Core IQ, a nonprofit with a mission to teach the life skills we all need but are not taught in school. Core IQ and the Post-Traumatic Thriving podcast are for informational purposes only and do not provide medical or mental health advice. Always consult with your licensed medical and mental health care providers.